All right, let me start this event now. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to this public webinar on national dialogues and digitalization. My name is Véronique Dudoué. I'm a senior advisor at the Burgos Foundation, and it's a great pleasure for me to moderate this event. Let me start by a few technical details. Although I assume most of you by now are well familiar with Zoom webinars. So we have enabled a live Q&A feature to ask both content-related and technical questions. You will find the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and any questions can be directed or directly typed into this box. So after the discussion with our three guests, we will move to a brief Q&A session. We will choose selected questions. An apology in advance if we cannot address all the questions due to the short time frame of this webinar. So moving now to the content of this session. Why are we here today? Well, we are here to launch the first publication in an exciting new series on national dialogues at Crossroads. So how we will spend this hour together. I will be having a conversation with the author of the publication. This will be followed by two short reflections by practitioners. And then with the time we have left, we will have an interaction with you, with the audience. Before handing over to the author of the paper that we are launching today, I would like to give you some brief outlines on how and why did we start reflecting on this topic. So for those of you who are not yet familiar with national dialogues, we understand these as nationally owned political processes aimed at generating consensus among a broad range of national stakeholders in times of deep political crisis. So these are national in the sense that they encompass an inclusive group of representatives from various segments of society. And they are usually also, as I said, nationally owned. By dialogue, we mean that the spaces are aimed to be open to all opinion and ideas. They are process-oriented, they foster joint learning, and they strive to achieve consensus-based decision-making. National dialogues, of course, do not have any blueprints. They are designed and they are implemented according to the nature of the conflict or the crisis that they are aimed to address, and according to the social political environment in which they operate. That time frame varies from a few days to several years. The objectives also vary from inter-elite crisis management to inclusive structural reforms, for example. They have similarities with other processes of conflict transformation, but they also have distinct features which make them different from, for instance, peace negotiation processes or constitution-making processes. At the Burgos Foundation, we have worked since 2008 on and with national dialogues in the field of conflict transformation. We've been providing strategic guidance, coaching, support to various conflict stakeholders on inclusive national dialogue formats, but also to various international actors. We published in 2007, together with Swiss Peace, a national dialogue handbook, which offers systematic reflections and practical advice on national dialogues. And in our practice work, we have been involved in a number of those processes in a technical support capacity, especially in the Yemeni National Dialogue Conference, but also in other places such as Lebanon, Sudan, or South Sudan. Why did we embark on the series that we are launching today? Well, in our engagement with various parties and stakeholders who are involved in a national dialogue or who are planning, considering a national dialogue, we have come to realize that there are still a lot of unanswered questions. So there's a lot of manuals and training materials out there on how to design and conduct a national dialogue process, but we think there's still little attention to how best to integrate certain topics and issues, or how to meaningfully include specific segments of society, specific societal groups. So we decided to develop a series called National Dialogues at Crossroads, where we try to address some of those questions and we look at specific cross-cutting topics. So we are specifically launching now papers around 3 topics, which are digitalization, protest movements, and climate change, as cross-cutting topics that are relevant to national dialogue processes, and we hope to have more such papers also coming in the future. So today we want to start this conversation on the intersection between national dialogues and digitalization. Why so? Well, we have come to realize that in contemporary conflicts and political crises, digital technologies are often associated with some of the central problems that stand in the way of more peaceful political futures. Digital technologies, social media can and have led to increasing polarization. They've been used to mobilize for violence, and they can also be used by repressive states to oppress the opposition, for instance. But despite these, digital technologies have been so far rarely explicitly addressed in national dialogue processes around the world. It might not be high on the agenda of the stakeholders that are launching those processes, but we think they are huge opportunities. So for us, we see digital technologies on the one hand as tools that are useful for national dialogues to make them more inclusive, more effective, more innovative maybe, but also as a substantive topic to be addressed in national dialogues. So in today's conversation, we will be talking about the opportunities of fostering dialogue with digital tools and about digital technologies and digitalization. So I'm now very happy to welcome our first guest today, Dr. Andreas Hirblinger, who is the author of the paper that we are launching. Andreas is senior researcher at the Geneva Graduate Institute. It's Center on Conflict Development Peace Building, and he's one of the prominent experts on contemporary dynamics of digital peace building. So we think he's the perfect person to be having today to discuss this topic. I think his full bio will be put in the chat so you can read more about his profile and experience. So I want to jump now into the conversation with you, Andreas. And my first question to you will be, so why did you decide to embark on this paper with us? So what's new? What makes the topic of digital technologies special in working with national dialogues? And for instance, how does it compare with other processes of digital peace building or peace processes? If you could enlighten us on this, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronique, and it's a great pleasure to be here, and it's a great pleasure to have contributed to this series. I've been working on the topic of digitalization for a couple of years now as a researcher, but also as a consultant with some organizations who provide peace and peace process support. Obviously, when we start looking at the particular topic of national dialogues, we do see that there are many similarities to other participatory peace processes. But I would say that obviously, because of the nature of national dialogues, it is really a kind of an application area where participation and digital inclusion are at the center. And that's obviously why I'm interested in this particular topic. But I think apart from that, I think in the field we have been talking over the past years a lot about the instrumental uses, and we'll speak about that probably in a minute a bit more, about how one can really employ technologies to support the process. But what strikes me as really, really interesting when it comes to national dialogues is that obviously they also provide an opportunity to shape the trajectory of digitalization. And that in many ways, kind of broad-based dialogue can help to particularly address the negative effects of digitalization. You've already mentioned a few of those in your introduction, including stuff like internet surveillance, lacking privacy rights, inequalities in digital literacy, or social media polarization, and hate speech. So when we are thinking about how to use technologies in the context, and how to think about the technologies in the context of national dialogues, I think it's really important to always have this double meaning and this double dimension in mind. And I think in many ways, I think where we then try to move with the report as well is to say we shouldn't think about technologies just as kind of tools that can be employed out there, that kind of independent of us, but really as digitalization as something that is shaped also by the views that people have on technology. So, to maybe have a very kind of crude and simple example here, it matters a great deal if people think about kind of a camera as something that can be used to spy on your neighbor and secure your house entrance, or whether it is used as thought of as a tool to promote a conversation, to connect to others, to see somebody else's emotional expressions, and to seek understanding. And in that sense, I think when we're talking about digitalization in the context of national dialogues, I think it really also provides an opportunity to rethink how societies think about what digitalization is meant to do for politics and for society, more broadly speaking. So there's an opportunity to kind of dig deeper. And maybe just one other example is, I think when we talk about that later as well, is, hate speech obviously being at the forefront of many concerns in conflict-affected contexts currently. And I think there is maybe a tendency to think about hate speech as something that needs to be reined in online, on social media. But I think, for instance, talking about stuff like hate speech in the context of national dialogues also provides an opportunity to dig deeper and to ask about, the historically grown and, the structural dimensions of racism and ethnic hatred. But I'll stop here. Otherwise, I'll take too much time.
No, great. Thanks a lot. Also for already highlighting, as you showed as well, this kind of double-edged sword that digital technologies can present. So you are telling us that these are not only a tool, but they can also be tools. They can be powerful and positive tools for making dialogue spaces, including national dialogues that are supposed to be inclusive, more effective. So while researching a number of cases around the world for this piece of research, and as you said, also talking to a number of practitioners and organizations that have been supporting those processes, what have you found? Did you come across any specific best practices or very or success stories, as we say, because I think on national dialogues we always say there's too few success stories. So any things that you have found surprising or interesting, very concretely as well? Like, I think you have a whole range of examples of the different ways through which those tools can be helpful. Maybe if you could highlight a couple of those.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are probably success stories in the report, even though I always want to, kind of temper the expectations. And I think for me, it's actually more important to also, when writing a report like this, to really also give the reader the opportunity to kind of critically reflect, always on kind of the ambivalent side of every single success that we might see. Because there's no pure success stories. There's no pure stories where just technical solutions work perfectly and we have the perfect results. And I think that's very important. But just to say, I think the report also touches on a lot of kind of mundane or more kind of boring, quote unquote, uses of digital technologies in support of national dialogues. And I think these are important. I think there are overall kind of 9 different categories in the report, and some are, like very, simple, such as, helping to prepare and coordinate processes through the use of cloud-based applications and collaboration tools, messaging services, etc. And that's actually where probably most of the tools and most of the technologies are currently used. But then I think what interests me, and I think the report highlights as well, is that there are kind of a range of tools that are a little less straightforward, a bit more tricky, a bit more daring, possibly. And they come possibly with bigger benefits, but they at the same time come also with bigger risks or bigger potential challenges. And that is because they somehow kind of have a deeper or broader impact on dialogue dynamics. And these are the tools that are in the report, kind of in the middle section. There's one table in the report. And if you look at the middle section, there are a couple of use cases that focus on, online consultations, remote direct participation, and so on. And these are really the tools where basically technologies are really used to make the population's voice heard, to really help bring out the preferences, the perceptions, the needs of those affected by conflict and crisis. And I think these tools are potentially success stories, but also potentially difficult for two main reasons. And the first is that they tend to kind of dare reaching really a large or even a kind of a representative part of the population. So we are seeing, particularly when it comes to online consultations, when it comes to online focus groups on a kind of a larger scale, or online decision-making processes, ambitions to really scale this so that one could reach sometimes a representative sample of the population, or make it available to everyone. And that's really great in a sense, but I think this is really also where one has, as a practitioner, as a support actor, really has to watch out for making sure that one considers the negative effects or the potential trade-offs of, with digital literacy, digital access, and so on. But I think more important than that, almost, is something that is a little less visible to see when it comes to these kind of more daring tools. And that is that these applications, so if you're using messaging services to do online consultations, or you're starting an online platform to survey population's preferences, but then also maybe have some sort of online dialogue and some decision-making process through voting, through fora, etc. These applications really impact, and they change dialogue dynamics. And sometimes in subtle ways that are not so visible for us, or maybe we are just accepting them, but they are actually quite powerful. So, it does make a big difference of whether you have kind of what was formerly kind of the Twitter length of a message, or, a short text message to state your opinion, or whether you can write a whole page. First of all, there's certain people who are writing, who are better equipped writing longer messages. And if you're writing shorter messages, you have to reduce, what you can say. You have to compress it much more. And then, for instance, when it comes to online consultations or online surveys, now a lot has been discussed in terms of the impact of large language models, and also natural language processing applications that use artificial intelligence. And these are very powerful tools because they can, for instance, summarize big amounts of text, right? But of course, that has a profound impact on the process. If you think about kind of an offline setting, who takes notes and who summarizes the results of a national dialogue, that's a very that's a very important job to say. And I think sometimes we might, when it comes to technology, we might think, yeah, this is neutral, technology will do that just right. But I think it's important to critically reflect on how this is done, and also how the results are used. And then mainly, I think because you mentioned this, that national dialogues are really also about kind of consensus building and deliberation. And I think here, some of these applications have this ambition to facilitate that. But I think looking forward, I think we should ask a bit more about what it actually means to deliberate. So, of course, one can use voting applications to come up with, what the majority wants in terms of a particular position. One can use statistical measures to understand, you know, what are middle positions or what are preferred positions according to certain demographic groups. But is this really deliberation? I would ask that a little bit critically. You know, is this enough? What about the emotional work? What about the cognitive work that has to happen with everyone who is involved in the dialogue? So just ending on that note.
Thanks, Andreas. Indeed, for pointing at the benefits of instrumental uses of technology in national dialogues, but also some of the trade-offs, dilemmas, and challenges. For instance, as you said, around the fact that technology is not neutral and has unintended consequences and effects that we need to be aware of, but also, as you said at the end, about like, yes, what does deliberation mean and how can those tools like enable it, and being more critical and reflective about that. So maybe a final question before turning to our discussants. You said earlier as well that indeed technology is not only a tool for national dialogues, but also themselves, they shape the contexts in which they are being used. They can create conflict, polarization, and so forth. So that's something that you address in the later part of the paper. Could you maybe summarize for us where do you see the potential of using the national dialogues as formats and mechanisms for addressing in society the effects and the use of digitalization and the impacts on conflict?
Yeah, sure. And you know, if you look at the report, of course, that's you will see that this is a bit kind of the shorter section of the report, and I think it is potentially so because it is a field that's still really evolving. But it's important that we all start collectively thinking about that. We have seen over the past years or so a couple of initiatives, not necessarily in the context of national dialogues, but in you know similar dialogue processes or in advance to peace processes or on the sides of them. So there were certain initiatives to negotiate, for instance, something like social media peace agreements or codes of conduct that could kind of, for instance, reduce online tensions and online polarization. Is basically in preparation of dialogue efforts. It's a bit like kind of a ceasefire agreement just for the online space. And you know, things like that are important, and they're instrumental, but they are also promising in terms of, you know, like really starting a substantial conversation about shaping kind of the trajectories of digitalization and shaping how collectively societies do want to use digital infrastructures and digital platforms, and how they want to govern them. But I think, generally speaking, I think there are many opportunities here that are still quite explored. Obviously, there are, you know, kind of mega trends when it comes to digitalization that are global and that are difficult to govern or to regulate on a national level or through a national dialogue. But I do think, of course, when it comes to, you know, setting constitutional safeguards, making propositions for certain legislation or certain regulations, I think there is an opportunity to use national dialogues to do exactly that. There are a couple of examples that we found, I think, actually even in the context of the Yemeni process. There was I think a sentence put in to reduce surveillance, for instance, and you know, I think we could probably see more of the same in other dialogue efforts going forward. But I just wanted to say and come back to the original point that I tried to make in the opening. I think when one does then talk about stuff like digital rights and digital access, or you know, the rights of minority groups to also shape their own digital futures, that all relates back to bigger social and political questions. And I don't really have an answer. I don't know whether we should bracket these conversations and make them about digitalization as such, or whether they should be part of a larger kind of effort to talk about the systems of governance and rights in the future. That might depend a little bit on the process, but I think it's certainly important to look at digitalization more thoroughly and more systematically in the future, particularly because it has become so all-encompassing and so ubiquitous around the world.
Thanks for inspiring us about thinking about those issues, and hopefully in the audience, those who are listening, who might be actually in the process where they are planning, preparing for a national dialogue. I hope they get inspired to also pick up on those issues and making sure they are part of the process. Indeed, I want now to turn to our second panelist, coming from the practice world. So wanting to now hear how what Andrea has offered to us reflects real experiences in national dialogues. So I will first turn to Zaha Langi, who is currently a senior advisor to the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen. Zaha has a long CV and experience. You will see it in the chat. She has been an architect of the Arab Network of Women Mediators and the Committee of Protection of Women During Armed Conflict. But one of the main reasons why we invited you today, Zaha, is that you've been co-founder of the Libyan Women's Platform for Peace in Libya, and you've participated in the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum as part of the peace process that was facilitated by the United Nations. So I would love, with this background and this experience that you bring today, I would love to hear your reflections on what you've heard from Andreas, what he's presented to us. How does that resonate with the views that digital technologies have had in the Libyan process, and by whom, and with what consequences maybe?
Thank you, Veronica, and thank you for having me at this important event. I think Andrea's report offers valuable insights on how digital technologies can enhance and facilitate national dialogues, like processes. Overall, the advancements in digitalization have revolutionized communication, enabling broader participation, inclusivity, engagement of wider segments of populations. The report does shed light on the ways in which digital tools can empower communities, or amplify certain voices, and foster dialogue across diverse stakeholders, though at the same time acknowledging the limitations, especially for those who lack the infrastructure of digital tools. And so the whole theme of digital mediation or national dialogues, I realize that the focus here is on national dialogues. However, you asked as to comment from my experience as participant in the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum, which is more of a peace process track one, and it's more of peace negotiations. There's a slight difference and nuance when it comes to digitalization, and maybe it's the chances and opportunities of success in using digital tools when it comes to digital national dialogues, national dialogues processes, maybe they're greater than in the case of peace negotiations, like the case of the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum. But I will go through these two because we also had an experience of national dialogues. And let me, before I start, remind, I come from a region where we have several conflicts, several peace processes, national dialogues, and we have at least two, and I will only name Libya, where you had the deputy head of the national dialogue was assassinated because of the social. So when we talk about these tools and these human processes to resolve conflict, understand and comprehend the consequences, the dire consequences they come with. So yes, digital mediation and national dialogues rely heavily on modern technologies, informatics, digitalization, digital communication, and it's an extension of the society's increasing reliance on information and communication technologies. Just as these technologies have become a part of an essential aspect of our various human life, these tools are now becoming more predominant when it comes to conflict resolution, to mediation, to national dialogues. And especially with the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting social distancing measures, this have amplified the role of digital mediation. And I remind all of us that LPDF took place during COVID-19. Actually, we lost like 4 colleagues who were members of the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum for being who had COVID, who passed away because of COVID. And so we had like a hybrid approach of digital mediation and face-to-face mediation as well. And we had to combine both. And why we had to combine both, though there were risks and we actually lost some of our colleagues during the process of the peace process, is that it was clear that digital mediation or peace process cannot replace face-to-face peace process. And so, yes, it can complement to make sure that the peace process is more inclusive, is more participatory, but it does not. It's not an alternative of face-to-face peace process and dialogues. And that actually happened after the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire in 2020, which further boosted the expansion of digital mediation. And in the case of, before the digital approach and virtual diplomacy have emerged as a result of this increased need of digital communication, because there is another risk. These approaches recognize the growing role of digital technologies, tools in all aspects of human communication and behavior, and especially recently in conflict resolution. And it was not only the UN that was using that tools. We can see that even women's mediation networks have played a significant role in strengthening mediation, peace building efforts during that pandemic, and using these initiatives of digital platforms to reach wider sectors or segments of society. And so even during the pandemic, in-person mediation and negotiation processes have continued partially. And in the case of Libya, with the LPDF, we started with the digital. I realize that the literature that we have focuses only on the digital and takes it as an example, but I am a witness and who someone participated in the process from the beginning to the end. It was only the 2 sessions, and then we realized the importance of having in-person meetings, though it entailed many risks. However, what we can, the link between these mediation or peace process, the LPDF, there was use of digital tools to make the process more transparent and make the process more participatory. And in the case of the LPDF, you can say it was hybrid. So the 75 used to meet, the first 2 meetings were virtual, but then there were in-person meetings taking place for months. But there were digital tools to make sure that youth, certain segments of society, like civil society, are engaged in the agenda and what could be asked to, for example, we were supposed to select the executive body. So they were part of the process through these digital tools. Also, the broadcasting of some of the sessions, the voting, we started by even voting through digital tools. However, there were breach of these, the confidentiality, the integrity, and hence we had to, with all the risks, had to go back to in-person meetings sometimes to do only the voting. It is one of the things, the major shortcomings and limitations for if these processes, whether national dialogues or sometimes it's not through consensus building, but there is some kind of a voting, it's not easy to have it through digital tools. And we tried many ways to do it, and there were breaches, and so we had to resort at the end to face-to-face. I actually want to stress that, yeah, I understand that Andreas said that it's not only a tool, and it is shaped by humans. It could be shaped by humans, but a tool is, after all, a tool. Dialogue and mediation are human-centered activities. This is not to completely disregard or underestimate the importance of the use of these tools, but to recognize their limitations and to recognize and the need to address the challenges and the risks associated with digitalization, such as issues related to privacy, misinformation, digital divide, and these were mentioned in the report, but it was not like the center of the report. One of the most important aspects when it comes to the kind of work that we do, whether it's peace processes or mediation, dialogues, is the building trust and relationship building. Building trust is the fundamental aspect of mediation and dialogues, and it can be challenging to establish and maintain trust solely through a digital means. Face-to-face interactions often allow non-verbal cues, gestures. In virtual settings, it may be more difficult to establish that kind of trust and create conducive environment for open dialogue. And that's why I remember in the negotiations of 5+5, the military commission, they used to not even meet. They only meet in Libya, referring to the case of Libya, the military track, only meet through with the mediator. However, and they used to stay in different hotels and not meet face-to-face. However, the SRSG once told me that he arranged for the delegation, the two delegations, one place only for them to pray. So they had to pray in one place and to recognize that they have something in common. So this is something, it could be very simple, but it's not possible through digital and virtual means. Also, another aspect is the limited nonverbal communication, such as the body language, the face expressions. All of this play a crucial role in communication and understanding. And this is very important when it comes to to what we do on in mediation, negotiations. Andreas now mentioned the role, though briefly, the emotional intelligence, values like empathy. All of this is not possible to give room to if it's only through digital tools.
Zahra, I will, sorry for cutting you off. I just want to make sure we have time for interaction with the public.
So I will end here, just emphasizing that what we do, mediation and peace building, national dialogues are human activities, and tools at the end of the day are tools. And stop.
Thank you so much. I got your points very well, at least. So nothing replaces human interaction, indeed, but as a complement. In the Libyan case, you've given us many examples where digital tools could be helpful for transparency, participation, decision-making, and so forth. Thank you so much. I want to briefly turn to our second practitioner before opening to whatever time we have for the questions that have started coming into the chat, and some really interesting ones as well. So I'm very happy that we have with us as well today Ahmed Eleiba, who is the Senior Program Officer at Swiss Peace. Ahmed was actually part of the advisory group, which has accompanied the production of this paper. And here I want to acknowledge and thank all of those individuals and practitioners from our peer organizations who've been very helpful in guiding this paper to come to life and to also be anchored in reality and in real world experiences. So Ahmed also has a great and long-standing experience both on mediation support and on support to national dialogues, and actually working with Berghoff, for instance, on the annual training program, which looks at both mediation and national dialogue processes. And Ahmed, I know that at Swiss Peace you are working a lot on this nexus between technology and mediation. So same as Zahra, I would love to hear your brief reaction to what you've heard so far. You've also had the chance maybe to start looking into the questions coming from the audience. So I know that's an impossible task, but maybe in 5 minutes, any insights from that, and also indeed, and like in kind of situating our conversation in the broader spectrum of political processes and methodologies that we have out there. That would be great. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Veronique, and to the Berghoff Foundation for the opportunity to be here today. Luckily, Zahra has covered some of the points that I wanted to cover. So I have about 6 straightforward points that I'd like to make briefly. First of all, the report underlines the importance of distilling digital tools, what the paper calls tool centrism, from the broader substantive issues. I think it's very important to draw a distinction, especially that for peace building practitioners who might be new to digital tools as such, and they tend to immediately focus on the tools. As such, it's important to maintain the human-centered approach, as Zahra stressed, and to be driven by the purpose, the why of it. Why digitalize national dialogue? Why introduce digital elements and not start with the tools as a starting point? 2, it's important to unpack what's in the name. Again, what is the political reason behind of the use of digital tools in national dialogue? This relates to, in particular, to be frank, to avoiding the autocratic trap. Some governments, some national dialogue processes could instrumentalize digitalization of national dialogues to circumvent or even replace genuine and inclusive consultations. And I think Zahra alluded to this as well. Because it can be relatively easy to manipulate and show big numbers of digital participation statistics, creating an impression that may or may not be true of significant public engagement. Digital tools can be the go-to technique could be to some actors to avoid more serious consultation processes. There are at least a couple of cases in the MENA region that one can refer to that did use digital engagement following moments of social and political upheaval to give the appearance of consultation while barely engaging the opposition in any significant way. Third, past practices of deploying digital tools in political and including national dialogue processes also show the importance of being critical again towards why and which tools are being used. Many national level consultation processes seem to focus more or easily fall into the trap of seeking to generate higher engagement numbers and rates than on clarifying how they take this input and actually make it part of the actual process, translate it into usable material for the national dialogue. Thus, it's important to close this sort of feedback loop and go beyond nominal engagement statistics of this is, how much many thousand or million people engaged online in a national dialogue, and important to give attention to making sure that the inputs from the dialogue are actually the digital engagement are actually transferred into the deliberations of the national dialogue process. There's a case of around the process of drafting a constitution in Ghana in 2010, 2011, which was able to generate 60,000 written inputs received digitally and through mail. And what that process did is basically summarized the 60,000 written inputs around particular clusters and gave them as summaries to the commission. And this writing the constitution. And this, of course, can be tricky because there is a subjective factor in how you summarize, how you, especially if you ask people to give written input about particular articles of the Constitution in that case. Fourth, regarding hybrid processes, and this was also covered both by my two colleagues here, it's important to use digital processes as mediums of engagement, of communication, also in a hybrid manner. And this covers one of the questions, I believe, from an Ethiopian colleague in the chat regarding, how do we, for example, connect low bandwidth areas digitally. And basically, there is a very good example from Yemen from 3 years ago, also during COVID, of basically locally convened focus groups in person that have a digital facilitator that is contributing in real time to colleagues and in peer focus groups in other areas. And so this, for me, is an example of a synchronous process using digital tools where you have a facilitator or a medium as a person basically transferring or transforming that input towards colleagues. It can also be asynchronous, where you have things not happening at the same time, but with the same purpose and towards the same process. I believe also that the current work of the Ethiopian National Dialogue Commission is at least starting to use digital tools in the form of social media at this stage, at least of the national dialogue, as I understand it, to showcase the activities of the commission and the consultations they are doing in person. And so they have chosen in the Ethiopian example, at least at this stage, again, it's in the early stages, to go for the use of social media to foster transparency, rather than perhaps at this stage to engage the public to collect inputs. And it will be interesting to watch how the Ethiopian process will further evolve. Fifth, digital technologies are crucial in engaging the diaspora, and I think that's an important perspective. It's actually partly why there is recently an uptick in the use of digital tools in national dialogue. So it is important to engage where the diaspora is important economically or politically, or have an influence within the country or on the international public opinion. There is, for example, the example of Egypt in 2022, where the Minister of, I believe, Immigration led a digital engagement process where she was in touch herself with many diaspora groups in order to discuss their ways and inputs to get out of the economic crisis at that time. And this was also mandated by, obviously, the government. Finally, the use of digital tools in national dialogues, of course, I mean, this is a more philosophical point. People typically say, at least, that they bring, architects of processes or peace builders or governments, that they try to bring digital tools into national dialogue processes to expand public interaction, whether it's through more transparency or active citizen engagement. And most of these cases that we've mapped at Swiss Peace, we've recently looked at 9 cases at least, are typically contexts where public participation has historically been typically already low. It's part of why there is a need in the first place, perhaps, for national dialogue. And so if the architects of the certain national dialogue seek to achieve transformative changes through the national dialogue, the use of digital technologies becomes even more important because it does not become only about the tools and the engagement statistics and the short-term legitimacy, but rather to be used to successfully make the case for continued public engagement and expanding the civic sphere and the civic space after the national dialogue, so that the notion of public participation becomes, gets taken more seriously, and that there is a successful first case for it in the national dialogue, to be there later, even in the presence of representative institutions, parliaments, and so on. And as such, it becomes hopefully part of the social contract that emerges out of a national dialogue. And I will stop here in the interest of time, and very happy to also look further at the questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for trying to pick up on what was said already and adding those 6 other elements, which I found really interesting. I think you also stressed, for instance, the role of intermediaries, those that are kind of in between the inputs that are coming and then the receivers, and I think the importance, but also I think, as Zahra said, the power of those, and keeping that in mind when thinking about the advantages and also the risks of digital technologies. In the interest of time, I think I will see what questions have already been asked and even answered into the chat. I saw that, for instance, Andreas has been very active answering some of them in writing, so the audience will have access to those written answers already. But maybe if I can bring you back live, and Andreas, some of the questions that were addressed to you and to the panel had to do with communities or let's say countries that have limited digital infrastructures, and I think that's one of the often heard limitations of digitalization for not only national dialogues but also peace processes and multi-track processes. Any thoughts on that, and any advice or good practices that you've seen besides what we've heard already from the 2 co-panelists?
Sure, Veronique, thank you so much. And I just want to say also really grateful to listen to my other co-presenters here and their considerations that they shared. I think it shows how much there is really to think about, and a lot of smaller aspects that are worthwhile discussing in length. Obviously, we don't have the time today, but please, everyone, be in touch in case you're interested in this topic. We continue doing research on it for a few more years. I think the topic of kind of using technologies or digitalization in kind of less infrastructurally developed countries, if I can frame it like that, is really a tricky one. I cannot do justice to that in a few minutes, but I think maybe just as a general guidance, I think it's wrong, or it would be wrong to think that because there's less access and there's literacy, digital technology and digitalization matters less. And sometimes it's actually the opposite is the case. And unfortunately, it's particularly the negative effects from what I'm observing through our research that are more pronounced in such places. So we're doing research on South Sudan, for instance, where regulating or disinformation, hate speech becomes just much more tricky because there is so little in terms of governance oversight, but also in terms of civilian and civil society capacity. There are some really good NGOs, but it isn't enough. And when it comes to what every single citizen could do, of course, here questions such as digital literacy, concerns about that do come in. Even though I do want to say, I think from particularly now, more recently, but we're seeing also in Europe and in the West when it comes to the more like recent globalized conflicts, I think it's also quite interesting to see how bad, for instance, social media dynamics can turn out in places such as Germany or Europe. But generally, I think just to highlight that there, of course, one doesn't always have to think big when it comes to digitalization. Of course, we always think about, the newest gadgets or the most ambitious digital projects, but I don't think that's necessarily the right approach. So as Ahmed said, I think it's important to think about kind of tailor-made, context-specific approaches, and really thinking about, what should be done and what are the needs first and foremost. But I'll stop here. So not many concrete answers, but hopefully some food for thought.
No, but thanks already. Maybe since we have 2 more minutes, if I can ask you briefly one more question to answer in 1 minute. One of the many uses that you described in the paper relate to trust building and how digitalization can help trust building. I think there was one question around that. Any insights on that? Like, have you seen it work, or is it more of a potential perspective?
Yeah, I think very briefly on this one. I think that's an interesting topic. I think particularly during the COVID pandemic, a lot of people said we need to take everything online, but it's not great. And it's really difficult to have meaningful conversation and to build trust between stakeholders. I think about this a bit differently now. I think there are, for instance, demographic aspects that matter. I think if one engages with younger populations, I'm seeing a lot of online activism and digital work that's happening in places like Sri Lanka, for instance, where people are really very tech savvy and they don't have a problem having a conversation and an open conversation online. It might be more difficult with like people who are not digital natives, so to speak. So it's always important to consider the social and the political context, I think, with all of that. Particularly also maybe just to say, of course, if there's cultures of digital authoritarianism or like also, you know, like a past or history of surveillance, it can be tricky to roll out like, you know, ambitious and also potentially dangerous, in fact. So in that sense, you know, trust or missing trust sometimes, of course, reflects certain realities. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being succinct in trying to answer those big questions indeed. Unfortunately, we only have 1 minute left, and I have a couple of announcements to make. So I will stop the Q&A here and want to make sure that you all get those announcements before we close. So the first one is indeed that all 3 papers in the series are already on our website. So we've been talking about this paper on national dialogues and digitalization. You can read all about it now on our website, and I think the link has just been put into the chat. And the second announcement is that on the 7th of December, we will have our next launch public webinar, which is going to be on protest movements and national dialogue. So we will follow a similar format. So I would really warmly invite you to this session that I will also have the pleasure of moderating. So I hope to see many of you then. I hope you have enjoyed this session. I really want to thank our 3 guests today for your insights, and I wish everyone a very good rest of the day. Bye-bye.